The Timberwolves land Ayo Dosunmu, trade out Rob Dillingham and Leonard Miller, breaking the trade down with Jack Borman. Why it's a great trade for the Wolves and evaluating what comes next. Buyout market? Next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. This Sunday, if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. My name is Ben Beecken. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And man, it was an eventful trade deadline week, really, for Minnesota, making a trade Wednesday, making a trade early on Thursday. And we're going to unpack the whole thing today here with Jack Borman from the Locked On Wolves postcast. We're going to go through the why this was a good trade for Minnesota. We both feel this way. We're going to talk about the fit of Ayo Dosunmu in Minnesota, as well as why the Mike Conley trade set this deal up to happen in the way that it did, and why ultimately, we could talk about the Rob Dillingham, asset management, and we will. But this is a good fit for a team that's trying to win right now, and they're almost certain to extend Ayo Dosunmu's contract very soon, or at some point in the next couple of months. We're going to talk about that with Jack, as well as what's next on the buyout market. There's lots of names out there, some old friends, some big names. Could the Timberwolves be in play for some of those guys? We'll talk about that with Jack as well. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube. And, of course, you could also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Jack Borman. All right, Jack Borman is back. We're talking trade deadline and recording this here a few hours after the deadline on Thursday. The Timberwolves did not get Giannis, which we talked about as a possibility a couple days ago. That was, of course, what used up a lot of the oxygen, and rightfully so, surrounding the Timberwolves all week. And ultimately what they did is something that a lot of us thought they'd do going back a couple of weeks or more, which is acquire kind of a, I don't know, mid-tier target, which sounds like we're maybe underselling Ayo Dosunmu, but kind of a, not a superstar, but definitely made a significant move for a rotation player. The Timberwolves trading for Ayo Dosunmu and also Julian Phillips from the Chicago Bulls, sending out Leonard Miller, Rob Dillingham, and 4 second-round picks with various, least favorable of these picks and different qualifications like that, or qualifiers, I should say, and all those different picks. So we're going to talk a little bit about the deal itself today. We're going to talk about first Dosunmu's fit with the Timberwolves. I want to get Jack's take on that. And, we'll just kind of talk about how he's going to fit the rotation, then get into some of the I guess, maneuvering that Tim Conley had to do to make this trade happen, and ultimately what happens next when it comes to the buyout market and things like that. So I guess in terms of your first reaction to this deal, Jack, we talked a little about Dosunmu the other night on the show. What's your take on his fit with the Timberwolves? What are you excited about that he brings to the Wolves?
Yeah, I think for me, the first few things that I look at are, well, actually, before I get into that, I have some custom scripts that I run to fetch NBA data. It's kind of part of my game prep, and as part of that, I thought this was kind of funny that I generate similarity scores based on statistical profiles that takes into account things like per game stats, shooting volume, shooting efficiency, shot distribution, play style, so like drives, points in the paint, fast break points, and their usage rate, all those sorts of things. The player that was most similar to Ayo Dosunmu in this, using this season's stats, I'll give you one stab at who that player is.
I'm gonna cheat. Is it a player on the Wolves or the Bulls?
No, but it's just funny given the conversation.
Man, I'm trying to think of. I've been comparing him to DiVincenzo. What's that? Oh, Nickeil Alexander-Walker.
It's Nickeil Alexander-Walker, which is a 67% match. And the other 4 are Tyrese Maxey, probably because of his ability to get to the rim.
Yep.
And Norm Powell, Con Knippel, because of just the prolific jump shooting, and then Kobe White as well, for some of the playmaking numbers, which I just found pretty interesting, given the kind of the scope of the conversation that we've had. Who the Wolves are missing in Nickeil, who they might get in a guy like Kobe White. And then maybe some things that general fans don't necessarily know about Ayo Dosunmu, just in his ability to get to the rim and some of the kind of similarities he might have to a guy like Tyrese Maxey in that regard. But for me, it's just he's efficient in two really important areas offensively, right? It's pick and roll as a ball handler. I wouldn't classify Dosunmu as a point guard. I think he's more of a combo guard that has some on-ball ability, very similar to Nickeil in that regard. And if you just look at just his points per possessions on pick and rolls, including passes that he makes. So whether he is a scorer in pick and roll or shots that come off of a pass while he's the handler in pick and roll, it's 1.08 points per possession or 108 offensive rating, which is 84th percentile. And you might hear 108 offensive rating and think that's like low relative to the league average offensive rating. But you have to take into account that this is only coming when they're in the half court. And the half court average offensive rating in the league this year is about 98.6. So really efficient in that regard. And then in spot up situations, right? This includes catch and shoot situations, as well as his ability to play off the catch and score, in that floater range or as a driver all the way to the rim or pull up long twos, those types of things. And the offensive rating there is 122.9 or 1.229 points per possession. That's 89th percentile. So he's 52 of 111 from three in those situations, 46.8%. And I guess maybe one of the grayer flags for Dosunmu is just that his ability to play off the catch and finish hasn't been as good as maybe you'd want it to be. It just 20 of 47 from two, it's 42.6%. So you'd like him to be a little bit more efficient in the mid range, especially considering he'll be in that pick and roll partnership with Rudy Gobert. So maybe that's kind of the one area that you'd like him to be better. But the other part of it too is he just gets to the rim, which is important in just being able to collapse a defense. Takes 45.9% of his shots at the rim, which is a super high number for a guard that can also just shoot the leather off the ball from three, or at least has this year. But he only shoots 61% at the rim. So that's certainly something that you'd like to see him be able to do a little bit better moving forward. But, again, I think that, again, as a pick and roll ball handler in spot up situations, really, really important addition for the Timberwolves.
Yeah. And I think as a cutter as well, and I haven't quite yet pulled all of the data on how often he's used as a cutter, but I bet it's a lot. And that's also how he gets some of those attempts at the rim. And I mean, just like Basketball Reference, shooting by distance isn't like it's not the best way to pull this, but just looking at that, I mean, this season he's shooting 41% of his shot. You said 45% at the rim. They've got 41% within 3 feet. But he's also shooting roughly 40% of his shots from outside the arc. So you're talking 80+% of his shots are outside the arc or at the rim. And he's doing, yes, as a pick and roll ball handler, but something like 93% or something of his 3-point attempts or his 3-point makes are assisted. So he's not shooting off the dribble. He's shooting threes and catch and shoot opportunities. He's cutting without the ball, which is going to be important. Having him out there, I mean, like, think about how defenses were playing the Timberwolves when Mike Conley was on the floor, and knowing that he could shoot the ball, but he didn't want to put the ball on the floor. And when he put the ball on the floor, they were playing him to pass. And that's not the case with Dosunmu. And he's not obviously the same player as Mike Conley, but defenses are going to respect him more as somebody who can do multiple things and also move without the ball is the big thing for me as well. When Julius Randle is in an isolation situation or Anthony Edwards is handling up top, to have somebody who's both a dangerous spot up shooter, but also can, backdoor cut on you or cut creatively and get himself open for a jump shot or a opportunity at the rim.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of leads into another point that I was going to make too, is that I think his ability to play in the slots next to Anthony Edwards is going to be really important too. I think the way you think about Dante DiVincenzo and the way that he has gotten better as a cutter, knowing how to play with a guy like Julius Randle, how to play with Anthony Edwards nowadays. I think guys are so worried about staying connected to them in the corners because of just his nature as a 3-point shooter. He struggled shooting the ball a little bit more from the corners this year. Dante has. And so he has cut more. I mean, he's only shooting 37% from the corners, which is not great for a shooter of his caliber. But Ayo Dosunmu is right at 46% from the corners. And so he can certainly play there. But then you think about, who the Wolves are going to be able to put beside Anthony Edwards in the slots is really important, especially against defenses that are going to load up on him and play boxes and elbows. Mike Conley, for reference, only shot 30.1% on above the break threes, and that's normally where he was situated next to Ant in the slots. Ayo Dosunmu is at 44.7% on 132 attempts so far this year. McDaniels is at 42% on 100 attempts. Dante and Naz, these two numbers are insane. 39.9% on 318 attempts for Dante. And Naz Reid's at 38.6 on 220 attempts. So those guys have been shooting the ball really, really well from the slots or above the break on huge volume. And so to add in another guy that can not only break down the defense and kind of get to the rim in the way that Ayo can with some of the speed and ball handling that he has, but also his ability to stay spaced and knock down shots is super important too. And that's not even getting into what he can bring to you on the defensive end of the floor as well.
Yeah. I guess let's quickly touch on his role in the rotation here, and then we're going to move on to talk a little bit about some of the maneuvering related to the contracts and the Conley trade. But in terms of the rotation, I think it's a pretty obvious. I mean, you talked about the both on-ball and off-ball role that he could play. He's effectively filling the rotation role of Mike Conley. But if we think about the post-Mike Conley trade Timberwolves and what we saw in Toronto the other night, I mean, this is a team with 6 guys that are squarely in the rotation. Obviously, Bones Highland is still on the fringes of that. Jalen Clark is on the fringes of it. And it seems like if we're like hierarchy ranking the depth chart, like Ayo Dosunmu slots in at number 7, and then whatever the Wolves need on any given night, it's more Bones or less Bones, or more Jalen Clark or less Jalen Clark. I think in my mind, it's almost, even though he's not the same guy as Mike Conley, I think it's almost exactly those minutes, and maybe could take a little pressure off of DiVincenzo on certain nights or whatever the case might be. But it feels like it just gives you another guy that when Ant's off the floor, somebody else that can score in a variety of ways. And then when Ant's on the floor, somebody else that can handle the basketball in the half court and allow Ant to get off the ball, and then also spread the floor and spot up like we talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I can't remember if I was talking about it with you or with Luke, just the ability to, continue to add guys that are two-way players, right? And I think it takes a lot of pressure off of Chris Finch in managing the rotation when you have a guy that can play both ways. And I think then, like you said really well, it allows you to kind of pick and choose who you want to kind of fill that eighth guy spot between Bones for offense, Clark for defense, or Baron J for defense, or TJ Shannon. I mean, we've kind of forgotten about him just because he's been injured. Another former Chicago public school kid, started Illinois, and now here on the Wolves. But I think that, it's going to give Chris Finch a lot of optionality there, which is really important. But I think, I would like to see him pretty much take all those minutes from Mike. And I would also like to see him, potentially take some minutes away from Randle too. I think in the sense that you can now play more 3-guard lineups more comfortably than you could before, without worrying about how it might impact you on the defensive end of the floor. And I think there's going to be nights where, honestly, I shouldn't necessarily just say Julius. I should also include Naz and Rudy in this, because they've all had their nights where it's just clearly not their night. And I think that, this would allow Finch to not have to just square peg a round hole with, trying to force those guys minutes on the floor. And now you can have a different look. Like I think about what they did in the start of the fourth quarter last night against the Raptors, where you have a lineup with Bones, Dante, Jaden, Naz, and Rudy. Like you could slot Ayo into any one of those first 3 slots too, and be able to fairly easily replicate what a lineup like that can do. And so I think that he can kind of be a chameleon in the sense that he's such a well-rounded player that can fit well in more offensively tilted lineups, fit well in more defensive minded lineups. So I think that Mike is kind of the same way, or at least in Finch's mind, Finch saw Mike that way. And so I think that he'll take a lot of those minutes. And then on nights where, Bones is really struggling defensively or is having the turnover bug on the offensive end of the floor, he's going to play more minutes. But I think he's going to be like Dante in the regard that, you're probably going to see him play, more minutes than you think you would have seen him play, just because of his ability to play both ways.
All right, next we're going to talk about the contract situation, how the Wolves pulled this off, and then we'll get into the buyout market. Who could the Timberwolves potentially land on the buyout market next? Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at DoorDash. The season's heating up, and DoorDash has a way to keep fans in their bag the whole way through. Whether you're watching the highlights, the tunnel fits, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes the entire season more fun because every player has their bag. With DoorDash, fans have one too. DoorDash keeps your snacks stocked, your gear fresh, and your watch party vibes absolutely on point. There are nights when your team stresses you out. If you're a Timberwolves fan, you get it. Let DoorDash become your post-game therapy. Sometimes you just need dessert right now. Maybe those late night interviews hit, which are always fantastic when it's Anthony Edwards getting the late night interview. Suddenly you need chips at midnight. DoorDash is built exactly for that. If the group chat says pull up, DoorDash makes sure you show up prepared. Snacks, cups, even a phone charger for your friend that's always at 2%. From tip-off to overtime, stay in your bag and order on DoorDash. Get snacks, drinks, gear, whatever gets you through the season delivered right to your door. DoorDash, in your bag all season long. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends at Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has got to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number. That way nothing gets missed. Plus, everyone can see the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer. You can even keep your existing number. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnba. That's Quo, QUO.com/lockedonnba. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, so getting into the contract piece of this, and really, I guess the nuts and bolts of the trade, I think it's pretty fascinating. I mean, you can find any argument you want out there on Twitter or wherever, Reddit, wherever you want to go to find why Tim Connolly is the worst, or obviously why Chris Finch is the worst. There's a lot going around out there about, like, hey, did the Wolves need to trade Conley this way? Were they just quote unquote being cheap? Could they have gotten Kobe White? Like, all this stuff. My take on all of it is, and I'm going to let you explain the aprons and stuff. You do a really good job of explaining that. But like the Kobe White piece, like my mini soapbox on that is the Wolves could have gotten Kobe White. And there are some things Kobe White can do that are arguably better, or maybe there's a higher ceiling with what you could be with Kobe White than what Ayo Dosunmu could be in a Timberwolves uniform. But to me, the Dosunmu fit is more seamless and works right now. And Kobe White, there's a future cost there where if you're going to extend Kobe White, and we'll talk about the not potential, and almost for sure Dosunmu extension, because it's going to happen given what they gave up for him. But I just think ultimately Kobe White obviously makes more money now. He's going to make more money on the extension. He's a higher usage, less efficient guard. Ultimately, he's a worse defender. So for people that like Kobe White, sure, there's some things he does well, but you're making this trade and you're paying him more money and you're extending him. And probably, if they had done that trade, it's messy, but I think they would have been, well into that first apron. And right now, at the moment, they were able to take more salary back in this trade because they were under the first apron because of the Conley trade. So obviously there's a lot going on here, but essentially they made the Conley trade to get under the first apron to allow them to then make a trade like this one if they weren't able to get Giannis. And now they could even pivot, and we'll talk about this later too, and pick up Mike Conley in the buyout market now that he's been bought up by Charlotte. So they left themselves, we talked about this on Wednesday, you used this word earlier for Finch, but optionality, that's something that Tim Connolly created for himself by making the Mike Conley trade, yesterday, and setting themselves up for the ability to make this move. So what's your take on the Conley trade in the context of now ultimately the Dosunmu trade, and what Tim Connolly did to get us to where we are right now?
Yeah, so I think it's a pretty shrewd move, right? I think that, first of all, just getting under the first apron, like with the Conley trade, they had to have known that Mike was going to get rerouted and the potential for this was going to be there. I think that, I don't know that they would have done that had they not known that. I mean, they saved $21 million in luxury tax money. It'll probably end up shaking out to be something closer to 19 once, Mike does come back, because John Krasinski just reported on KFAN a few minutes ago that he fully expects Mike Conley to be back with one of those two roster spots. And so,
which $22 million is not penny pinching either, by the way. Like, that's a significant chunk of money, especially when you're talking about the context of some of this other stuff.
Correct. And so if you're able to just save save, let's call it $20 million. You're able to save $20 million and end up with a better roster on the other side of it. And you retain the guy that, was part of the reason why you had those that $21 million, and he still gets his money. I mean, it's kind of a win-win-win all the way around. And so that allowed the Wolves to get under the first apron. And the significance of getting under the first apron is that you can take back more money in a trade than you send out, as long as once that trade is complete, you are still underneath the first apron. And so what we don't know right now, as of 6:00 on Thursday, 6 p.m., is that we don't know whether Ayo Dosunmu was traded into the $7.58 million trade exception that the Wolves generated from the Nickeil Alexander-Walker sign-in trade. That's part of the reason why a lot of these stars moving in free agency or bigger name guys are signed and traded now, so that teams at least get something for facilitating a move like the Wolves did. And that can end up being important, because if the Wolves then are able to create some type of trade where they're trading out Rob and Leonard and then taking back Julian Phillips in a separate deal, obviously it would need to be a 3-team deal just to make the money work for Chicago. But the Wolves then technically would be sending out the same amount of money that they're taking back with that Nickeil Alexander-Walker trade player exception, so that they wouldn't be hard capped by the first apron, so that they could potentially sign a different buyout guy that is worth more than the non-taxpayer mid-level of $14 million. So let's say Chris Middleton is a guy that becomes available. He's paid like $33 million this season. If the Wolves were to sign him before they get under the first or while they're still under the first apron, that would work. And then you sign Mike as the other guy. And the reason why you'd be able to sign Mike, if you were, for whatever reason, the Chris Middleton signing took you over the first apron, is Mike's contract is less than that $14 million mark. So you could still bring him in, underneath that, while you're over the first apron. So it just gave the Wolves more flexibility here. But even if they did a straight 2-for-2 trade, where they took back more money than they sent out, they would be hard capped at the first apron, meaning they could not go over that. And so right now, the Timberwolves have about $1.5 million below the first apron, which would be enough starting sometime early next week to sign 2 guys to the prorated veteran minimum for the rest of the season. So I would expect that they're probably, based on John's reporting and Dane's reporting, Dane reported that Johnny Juzang could be a guy that they sign to a prorated vet min to kind of get that roster up to the 15th spot, which they need to do by March 1st. You'd still be able to do that.
Yeah, which the Wolves have obviously, and they're not the only team that decided to do this, but they did it a couple of years ago with Luka Garza. They did it
last year with
Jalen Clark. Yep. And also Juzang is like, I think it's a game. It's either games or days. I think it's a game minimum or maximum that they could be called up as a 2-way player. And Juzang's like 3 games away, I think. So if they're going to do it, they're going to have to do it here pretty soon. And so I think that makes sense. Well, it's fun to go shopping in the buyout market and get 2 guys. Realistically, it makes a lot of sense to keep the guys. Now, they've also done this a different way in the past, and I'm not saying they're going to do this, but they could let Juzang go, sign a different two-way guy, and sign 2 buyout guys. But I think I tend to agree that the most likely scenario is they bring back Conley and sign Juzang.
Well, and the other thing too to keep an eye on too is that's how Bones Highland got in the mix with the Wolves last year.
It was a 2-way.
They upgraded Jalen Clark to a minimum, and then they signed Bones Highland to a 2-way, so they'd retain his bird rights going into the summer. So that's something that you could see the Wolves do. But I'd personally rather have someone like Kyle Anderson, just because he knows the system and is someone that I think would provide more of a tangible impact on the floor as another guy that can play 2 ways. But again, they're going to be able to sign 2 guys if it's the veterans minimum. They might have to wait a few days on signing a second one. If they sign Mike when he clears waivers on Saturday, then they'd probably have to wait a week or 2 before signing a second buyout guy, which is something to do, but they just have to do it by March 1st for someone to be playoff eligible. Do you want to get into the summer?
Yeah, we might as well. So in terms of buyout guys, is that I think that kind of covers it. Those are the guys that the Wolves are most likely going to be interested in. I think, it could take a little bit of time, as you said. So I think that pretty much covers that. We can talk summer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I would assume he was eligible to sign an extension of up to 3 years, $52 million before June. And so I don't think the Timberwolves do this trade unless they have very strong indication that Dosunmu would be good signing a contract similar to that. And so if you just think about it financially here, so the Wolves, let's just say the Wolves end up making a draft selection. Like the season ends today, they would have the 29th pick because of that pick swap with the Pistons that they traded in the Mike Conley deal. So that pick would cost about $2.93 million. And then Dosunmu, if he were to accept a contract of that type, and it has the standard, 7% raises or 8% raises, you're looking at him making about $16 million in year one. And that would put and then if you, let's say Bones resigns to the taxpayer mid-level of about $6.1 million or something like that, the Wolves are already over the first apron. And that's before filling out the last 3 roster spots. So it's going to be taxing for them to, figure out how they want to do this. But I think if they're committed to bringing back Bones Highland and Ayo Dosunmu, which I would presume that they are, I think the Wolves are going to be a team that is a team that ends up being over the first apron, under the second apron. And so that isn't really a big deal for the Wolves, other than, they won't be able to do sign and trades. They won't be able to do the buyout thing that we just talked about for next season. But perhaps the most important thing is that they can't use trade exceptions that they generate the previous season next summer if they're a team that goes over the first apron. So that trade player exception they just generated from the Mike Conley trade, which is like 10.7, they wouldn't be able to use that this summer if they decided to go the Ayo Dosunmu route. But again, I don't know who they'd feasibly try to sign through a sign and trade, because it would probably put them over the second apron too if they wanted to do it that way. So there's some order of operations stuff that you could get into, where you could theoretically take a guy in using that trade player exception, then sign Ayo, then sign Bones, and make it work that way. But I just don't know what player of significance, at least at this point, would be available for them to sign in a sign and trade that would work like that. Because every indication I have is that the Wolves don't want to be over the second apron moving forward.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that that's where the Wolves were coming into this season, or up until the other day, was over the first apron, under the second, and they can always maneuver in season like they just did with trading Mike Conley. So there's always, that seems very likely that's where they start next season, is over the first apron, under the second, but there's always the ability to do things a little bit, do things like they just did this week when it gets to the trade deadline. I want to close by talking, I guess we just talked extension, so I do want to hit just a little bit of, possibility for Giannis moving this summer, what this means moving forward, and just kind of put a bow on this transaction. We'll do that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, this coming Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60. And FanDuel's making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Maybe you're backing the favorite, which of course is the Seattle Seahawks, or riding with the underdog New England Patriots. Maybe you're building one last same game parlay. This is the game that everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. I love same game parlays for the Super Bowl, prop bets on the Super Bowl. It's the best day of the year to be on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, so just want to kind of put a bow overall on this transaction. All the stuff we talked about the other day was a lot of it was about the Giannis possibility. Of course, it's well documented. Milwaukee probably wanted to wait till the summer anyway. There's more suitors, more teams have access to picks. As soon as we get to June, teams start to unlock some of these picks that they can't currently trade because of the Stepien rule and things like that. So there's obviously going to be more suitors. presumably the Timberwolves will still be involved. The question is, could they still, make a play for Giannis? So plenty of time to talk about it in the summer, but I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on, like, hey, are they still going to be kind of, obviously the deadline's over, but is Conley still working on backing on almost back channeling to try and figure out, like, hey, if I trade, Jaden here and I get these picks, like, could we cobble this together in the summer? What's your take on A, will the Wolves be involved, which I think the answer is yes. And B, realistically, would they have a shot at getting Giannis without knowing everything about what the summer looks like in terms of what assets teams have and things like that? What's your thoughts on the possibility of Giannis in a Timberwolves uniform down the road?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I think you'd have to do something where the Wolves make a selection on behalf of the Bucks or another team on draft night, and then in the days immediately following the draft, you trade that selection plus your 2033 unprotected first, because that would be available after the draft. And then you have your Jaden going somewhere, Julius going somewhere type of thing that we were talking about. And I think that's really only feasible if the Wolves were, a first or two short of what the Bucks wanted relative to some of these other offers. And then I guess, the Bucks will also know where their pick situation is after the New Orleans dust settles with that whole pick protection situation. But I just don't know that it makes a ton of sense for the Timberwolves to pursue this summer, just because I think the price is going to be higher just with more bidders in the game. And I think that's why the Timberwolves are so motivated to try to get something done before this trade deadline. But I also think too that, if the Wolves just crash and burn in the playoffs, I mean, maybe it is a situation where they go out and they are more aggressive trying to figure it out with Giannis. But I think, the price is just going to be more prohibitive this summer than it was at this deadline, just because there's going to be more bidders in the game and in a ability, I guess, for the Bucks to be able to run the price up a little bit. But we'll see. I think that if they were to bring Giannis in, there's definitely some things that they could do financially where they make it work. And, maybe they're able to build something around Ant, Giannis, Nas, Dante, Ayo, Yohan, TJ, something like that, and roll with a core that has some of those guys, which would be interesting. But I think the Wolves are probably going to be out on Giannis, and then maybe they try to make more of a D'Angelo Russell style trade, where it's a 1-for-2 something to maybe make the team a little bit deeper, and you lean into Jaden and Nas as kind of your long-term 2 and 3, because those guys are going to be paid like 2s and 3s in the years coming up. So I think, but again, this just speaks to why the Cat trade was such a smart move, just from a financial perspective, is that the Wolves are in a position where they can really go wherever they want to without, there being super penal consequences. So it's going to be an exciting summer. And I think that, like I said, I think Tim Conley, his staff are all super smart and mapped all this out a million different ways, both for now and the summer. And so I think I'm just more so excited to see kind of maybe what they've learned at this trade deadline and how they put that into practice with what they decide to do this summer.
Yeah, it felt like Conley was trying to strike while the iron's hot in terms of Giannis signaling he'd come to Minnesota. The possibility, if the Bucks are going to trade him now, we can rival anybody else's deal. And now in the summer, they could potentially, their offer wouldn't even be close to what someone else could offer. And, they have less of those advantages like they would have had right now had they been able to pull off a trade. And so there's nothing wrong with kind of, obviously they've got a strong core in place as it is. And Jaden, you mentioned him being a 2, like, I mean, given what he's shown this year as a playmaker and obviously as a shooter, clearly his game's grown, and so they can do more work around the edges and continue to make this team deeper. They went from very deep last year to not so deep, and now they appear to be deep again. I mean, adding one whole rotation guy who's better than effectively the guy he's replacing in Conley matters quite a bit. All right. That's all we got here on this one today. Of course, Jack is on the live postcast following every Wolves game with Luke Inman right here on the Locked On Wolves feed on YouTube, and then also the audio feed as well if you can't catch it live. So be sure to subscribe and tune in when they go live following who do the Wolves have tomorrow night?
Pelicans.
Tonight, Friday night. The Pelicans, that's right. Pelicans, and then the Clippers matinee Sunday. Who knows with that on Super Bowl Sunday. So a packed weekend ahead. Ayo Dosunmu hopefully will be making his Target Center debut on Friday night. So we'll look forward to that. Be sure to tune into the postcast. Appreciate you coming on, Jack, and we'll see you live from Target Center tomorrow night. All right, there you have it. Big thank you to Jack Borman for joining the show. Big thank you to you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can find Locked On Wolves. A reminder, Jack will be on the postcast tonight or Friday night, depending on when you're listening to this, following the Wolves-Pelicans game. And a reminder that if you have not signed up for the Locked On NBA Everydayer Club, if you're an everyday listener, the club is built for you. You get Locked On Wolves ad-free. You'll also get to join the members-only Discord chat as well. Head to lockedonwolves.supercast.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.